Hi there. Welcome, everybody. I guess we have more people are coming in, but no problem. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. If you'd like, you can turn on your videos so it feels more like an intimate circle, which is always lovely. Feel free. I'm Talia from Healer Collective, and we help to elevate healers' voices, not just healers, but conscious thought leaders. And we really want to, we focus on all different issues have affecting the world today, and we mainly help healers and conscious thought leaders with marketing and business development help, and we host these monthly conversations. For me as a white woman, I think this is a very important conversation from all different perspectives. I don't know what it's like, to be BIPOC or and I want to know what it's like and want to be able to empathize, and so just being able to hear others' stories and backgrounds and perspectives and understand how we can support as well as help others who also come from similar backgrounds to connect with one another. So that's why we're doing this. I don't want to be, I shouldn't be really involved in the conversation, but I'll help moderate from Healer Collective's perspective. So yeah, you can type in the chat box if you have any questions during, and at the end we'll take questions. You can unmute yourself too if you want to just talk. This will be a conversation. It should be healing, and you know you can also bring up things that are challenging, of course, too, because that is healing. So tonight we have with us three incredible women. Somehow they're all connected. They all work with youth, and that's just a random fact that came. We just at Healer Collective, we just loved each one of their individual spirits and who they are and how they show up in the world and the incredible work that they're doing. But somehow they all work with youth, and you'll hear that in a second. And I'll just do a short intro for each, and then I'll let them talk naturally about their experience and why they do what they do in life and their mission. So Heather is an educator, plant priestess, and sound healer who has 15 years of experience cultivating healing-centered approaches for institutions geared towards social good. She is the co-founder of Black Healers Connect with Monica Cadena. Black Healers Connect connects healers across the African diaspora to share ancestral wisdom that restores ourselves and our communities. Thank you for being here, Heather. Nazinga is a Haitian American holistic health consultant, plant-based chef, 500-hour celebrity yoga teacher, award-winning blogger, and motivational speaker who helps people as an inspirational teacher. She started Yes Baby, I Like It Raw to teach and inspire people to embark on a holistic lifestyle, a project close to her heart because of her own journey. Through a radical lifestyle change, she was able to heal herself of the symptoms brought on by having a benign brain tumor, autoimmune disorder called scleroderma, and polycystic ovary syndrome. And then we have Aubrey, last but not least. Aubrey finds expression as a transformational breath facilitator and identifies as a queer woman of color who believes in the natural healing power of the self through yoga, meditation, breath work, and connection to spirits. So our first question is, please tell us why you each do what you do and how you've come into it. Yeah.
I can start. I feel like I was always the kid in class who wanted to go first. But again, just really happy to be here. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Talia. And to share a little bit about who I am and how I got started on this path, so you guys have some background information. I really struggled most of my life feeling this deep sense of not belonging and in many different areas of my life, and race being a really big piece of that. I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, so primarily a middle class white dominant district and area that I lived in. And really, for me, I always felt this separation. And being a biracial woman, so my father is primarily Black, African descent, mixed with a lot of other races and ethnicities. And my mother is Jewish, a white Jewish woman. And so for me, growing up as a little mixed girl in the suburbs of Philadelphia, it really did leave me with this this sense of really not understanding my identity. And that is very difficult for a child to endure, right, in many different ways, because as we mature, we're really, as a children, looking for ways that we can, you know, our brain works in pattern recognition, that we're looking for ways that we can integrate into society and be accepted. Like that is truly what we want deep inside. And growing up as, you know, a Black person in America, we are constantly faced with racism and prejudice and judgment and oppression. And, you know, also recognizing my own privilege as a light-skinned woman in this space. And it has been a real challenge for me to form a sense of identity. And so growing up with my father, to give you guys a little background of just like how I got to this place. My father is an actor, and as I mentioned, he's Black, and I constantly was being faced with the anger that he had towards the systems that we live in, especially in America. And that really played out in him getting arrested many times and like fighting authority, and me seeing, you know, the police. At one point, I was like 12 years old. The police had chased him down, literally chased us down in the car, and had guns all around him, circled him asking him, telling him to get on his knees. And he's like, I'm not going to get on my knees for you. You know, that's like, I guess I've never really told that story, but many situations that have happened in my life personally. And a lot of that has to do with race. And it's just been so difficult to navigate this space, and the conversations aren't usually had. And so really that left me feeling very depressed as a child, not really knowing who I was. And there are many other reasons for that as well. And then when I was about 21, I had two children very young, at 18 and 21. I got married and found myself really in this life that I had created that I was very unhappy in. And I felt that that was largely because I didn't really know who I was. And therefore, I felt like I didn't know where I was going or who I could become in this world. And so around that same time, I had a best friend. I went to Howard University, had my best friends from high school. We all went together. And I left early because I had my children. And right around the time she graduated, right after she graduated, she committed suicide. And that, on top of my already like growing unhappiness inside, really set me on this journey where I was almost suicidal. I was suicidal at the time, dealing with so many emotions, you know, those times in your life, and everybody really faces them at different levels of intensity at different points in their life. But in those moments, I felt like there was no option and like there was no other way out. And so I had the opportunity and was very privileged to go and try plant medicine, ayahuasca, and did my first transformational breathwork ceremony in that week. And it truly did change my life in so many ways, and set me off down this healing path for myself first and foremost. And so I could understand, like I said, who I was. That's what I went in. That was my intention. And now I'm here, and so happy to share with you guys and tell you more as we go, but I'm going to pass it on for now.
Thank you so much. Nazinga, Heather, would you like to share more about why you do what you do today, what it is that you do, and how you came into it, sort of your story, background?
Okay. Nazinga, did you want to go next? No, you're, well, my name's Heather Archer, and wow, why I do what I do. It's just very much, the word of 2020 has been embodiment for me. And so I really do feel like this is the year to really embody and step into my purpose. And a lot of that has gone through has been a result of like really going back into my childhood and doing a lot of work with healing my inner child. There's a lot of wounds that that have come about because of race, and because of not just racism, but also the intergenerational trauma that racism has, the legacy of it, and how that has really impacted my family for generations on back. And so I used to individualize a lot of issues, but as related to like drug abuse or poverty or mental illness. But now, after having, number one, just studied, well, first having my own lived experiences, but also having studied African American studies in college, and then also like really trying to get to the heart of like social issues in a lot of places in my life. I realize now that it has more to do with like the legacy and the trauma that racism and capitalism has had on this country. And so with that being said, I embody kind of what it would look like to right that wrong in my life. And a lot of that starts with my own personal healing. I spent a lot of time being angry about like racism and just like the state of the world. And, you know, seeing all of the Black folks get shot and killed and murdered without any kind of retribution, it really hurt and it made me angry for a long time. And I'm still angry, and yet I use that anger now as fuel to do the work of what would it look like to create something completely opposite of what I'm angry about. And so that's why I co-founded Black Healers Connect with Monica Cadena, and why I do the work that I do with healing. And I always try to start with myself and my family, because we can see the world through a lens, but the mirror is also really important through this process.
Incredible. And Nazinga?
Hi, my name is Nazinga Oniwosan. I am Haitian American, and I am here because I think from the time I was little, I knew I was supposed to be a healer. So Oniwosan is not a name that I was birthed with. It should have been the name I was birthed with, but it was given to me after I went through a traditional naming ceremony with a Yoruba priestess. And Oniwosan means healer in the Yoruba language of Nigeria. And so as a child, I always knew I wanted to be a healer, but for immigrant parents, the only concept of healing was doctor. So I remember being 3 years old and praying to be a doctor. And as I got older, I wanted to be a doctor because I wanted to heal myself and I wanted to heal my mother. As Talia mentioned, I still have a brain tumor. It's benign. There's more risks involved to have surgery. So they opted to put me on medication. I have a rare autoimmune disorder called scleroderma, which attacks your connective tissue and essentially can destroy your organs and stop them from functioning. And I have polycystic ovary syndrome. And I was diagnosed with this at a very young age. I was between the ages of 11 and 13. I got diagnosed with all of these things. So my mortality was something that was very much on the forefront. And it just drove me to want to be a doctor more. That combined with my mom being schizoaffective led me into a very focused major. I majored in neuroscience because I really wanted to heal my mother. My work has changed since then. I decided to take a pause. I didn't go to medical school and decided to focus on healing my body and healing my mind and spirit. And that looked like really deep diving into who I was beyond like my flesh and look at my legacy as a Haitian American. So my experience has been very nuanced growing up in America too, as a first gen American, particularly being Haitian, because my parents didn't speak the language. I'm also dark skinned. And when we look at issues of race and white supremacy, things like you destroyed my family came up because I was so dark, and my grandfather was mulatto. So a lot of my work led to like deep diving into self-acceptance, therapy and stuff like that. And I wanted to help people take that journey because it wasn't an easy journey. I didn't have a guide or a book to help me become who I am today. And so the work that I do through Yes Baby I Like It Raw is to help people unpack what path of their healing that they need to go. But the big emphasis is that your spiritual and mental health is so important. It's often negated when we talk about wellness. We focus on the physical health. And when I started my journey, I learned that my autoimmune disorder was a disease of fear. And when I tapped into what that meant, that really helped me to really deep dive into my spiritual and mental healing.
That's really interesting. So what do you mean by that, disease of fear?
So great question. So now I'm certified as a holistic health practitioner, and I can talk a little bit more. So for everything, when we talk about holistic medicine or traditional medicines, everything is interconnected. So if we have a disease or break in our physical body, that typically means that there's something also going on with us mentally and or spiritually. So in the case of my autoimmune disorder, when I went to a Chinese medicine doctor to see if I could get some healing around it, he mentioned that this was a disease of fear. So your question might be, well, you said you were 12 and 13 years old when you got diagnosed with. What were you afraid of? In my case, it was the first time in my life that I understood the whispers that your mom gets sick sometime. You know, when I was 12, that's the first time I realized, oh, my mom doesn't get sick. She's crazy, you know, and this is like lifetime movie type of stuff. And so if has anyone with mental illness, especially something like schizophrenia, you know, my mom's had these moments of psychosis that made me very afraid and very fearful. And sometimes it led to her being physically abusive to me as well. And so sleeping wasn't something that was very easy once that happened. And that topped with me being molested because someone saw this window because of my mom's mental illness to take advantage of me, led to me living essentially in my teenage years in perpetual fear. It was either my molester, would they come and attack me that night, or would my mother go crazy and attack me as well? And so not all diseases are diseases of fear, but now the research finally is starting to catch up with some of the things that we've been saying from a holistic perspective, that trauma, childhood trauma, specifically people who've experienced childhood trauma have a higher propensity towards autoimmune disorders. And so you can start to see some of that research now. And so that's why when we look at those types of research, in particular with people of color, Black people who suffer a lot more trauma just because of the conditions that we live in places all over the world because of racism, we end up having a lot of things like lupus and other autoimmune disorders.
Wow. Heather, Aubrey, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. First of all, thank you for sharing and being what a colleague of mine, Miss T, she calls it vulnerageous, you know, the vulnerable and courageous. So yeah, I think that when we really start talking about the systemic impacts of like mental health, and like we really start cross-pollinating it with race, which we just have not really done. Like finally, I'm starting to see a shift. But many times, I mean, back in slavery, there used to be a term, or I actually forgot what the term is called. I'll have to look it up. But there was a mental illness for wanting to run away and to escape slavery. So, I mean, a lot of times what we don't talk about is the ways in which mental health has actually been used as a tool of oppression of people of color in institutions, right? So like a lot of times, a lot of the societal constraints that we're living in the US in particular, I can only speak from that experience. There is a lot of things that help to make us sick as folks of color, as Black people. And so, yeah, I think that more education, like we need to have more spaces for children and youth to be able to feel safe, to really talk about what's happening. Because I wonder what might it look like if you did feel safe to share that, or to even have a program at that time. I don't know, maybe you did, but I'm just thinking a lot of the kids I work with, I work with the summer camp usually called, we're not doing it this year because of COVID, but we're going to be experimenting with another kind of digital camp later on in the fall, but it's called Camp Akili. And we work specifically with youth of African descent, ages 14 to 18 years old. And we take them on this week of learning about their history, learning about the beauty of their culture, and then also going through like the Middle Passage. What was that like? And just, it's the amount of stories though, like when we get the youth to break down and talk about what's going on at home, it was almost too much, to be honest. Like our counselors, it was a lot, because once they opened up and then the stories came out, it was horrifying. It was absolutely horrifying that so many stories like that exist. And so, yeah, we were talking before this call about just what does it look like to hold space for youth, particularly now, and, you know, particularly youth of color in the age of COVID. And I don't fully have the answer, but I also know that it has a lot to do with the ways in which we are able to hold space for people emotionally. And yeah, that's really key.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention something from that point. Thank you both for sharing, and Nazinga for like, really being so vulnerable and sharing that experience. It brought me to tears. And really what I'm starting to understand more and more is just how much bodies of culture are uncomfortable every day, you know, and the systemic racism that is really the fabric of our society here in America. And we're not that far out from these, from slavery in itself, right? And really that fear is living in our bodies constantly. And people of color are experiencing that disproportionately. And, you know, our nervous systems are so deeply impacted by that feeling of fear, right? And so something I just heard on a podcast on being today actually was a great movement bodywork practice for people of color specifically. And the speaker didn't say what it was for initially, but I'm just gonna, you know, do what he was doing. And it's just a movement, right? But he's just like, lengthen your spine, take a deep breath in, and then it's just a twist. And there's just simply twisting and turning to the side, and then allowing your head to turn all the way to the side and to the back of you as well. And even though it seems very simple, there's so much meaning to that, because even though we might be here, we might be in a space, or we might go to school, or we might go to work, and, you know, and seemingly leave everything else behind, right? Because we're busy, we got to do what we got to do, especially the culture in America to be busy and on constant alert 24/7, aside from COVID. But most of the time, you know, that is our culture, to always work hard and do better and be the best, in the spirit of competition, which really separates us deeply. But all that being said, you know, we show up to a space and there's still so much trauma, that's intergenerational trauma, living in our bodies constantly. And I just heard a study, I don't know how they found, you know, received these results or these findings, but that the epigenetics of trauma, it lives back 14 generations. And like, wow, you know, like I don't know, you know, people back 14 generations in my family. And so doing a practice like that really can help us to embody what we're feeling in this moment, and looking behind us to recognize, or to just bring awareness to the fact that I am safe. Nobody is here to get me in this moment, right? Because that is actually how we're feeling all the time inside. And so super important to have these conversations. And what I really am starting to see more and more, and I've always thought this, is just that is how much we really need to come together and change the conversation, so that we can, exactly as you were mentioning, Heather, a moment ago, right? Like really getting to the heart of social justice issues. And I love the way you said that, because we need a total restructuring from what we have currently. And I think that when we start, especially white people, start working to develop culture around this, then we have an a chance at actually making a difference, because even just the conversation is not enough. There has to be a lot of action that's taken, and consistent action to override, or not even override, but to heal. Yeah, to heal the trauma that we're facing every single day. So that's all I want to say on that point.
Wow. While I was talking to Heather before when we decided to do this panel, another thing she said that was so interesting and really cool to me was that it's a revolutionary act for Black people and people of color to rest and relax. And I thought that was, speaking to that practice of turning around, because I can't imagine what it's like to walk around your whole life and constantly be scared of what's behind you or who's going to attack you just for the color of your skin. Like, what that must do to your body, and just constantly being on edge. But I thought that was an amazing antidote to that, like staying home and not having to be in this culture of busy. And maybe Heather can speak to that, like, revolutionary act of allowing other people to rest and relax who are, of color.
Yeah, I'd love to speak on that. Rest is like my favorite thing right now. I try to get it as much as I can, when I can, even if it's for like 5 minutes or something. But essentially, very much inspired by the Nap Ministry and her work. And she really set the light bulb off for me a couple years ago. And at first it sounded kind of funny, like, oh, the Nap Ministry and the Nap Bishop. And I was like, okay, but then it's kind of cute. She is right. She talks a lot about the critiquing the culture of capitalism and the ways in which capitalism has built a society who thinks that their worth is tied up in our productivity, and the more productive we can be, the more we can produce, the more worthy we are as individuals. When you couple that and layer that with, the oppression of Black folks, how we were enslaved and brought here to work, like that's what we're supposed to do. We weren't supposed to be fully realized human beings. And so when we're able to take those moments of pause and rest and say, actually, I'm enough as I am in this moment, and to rest and to meditate, a magic can really happen, because it allows us to also reclaim our humanity. So there's a two-way street with the healing piece. And it's been something I've learned really working in communities, Black communities. I'm really honored to have been able to spend the last few years working primarily in Black communities. And I learned a lot, though. There was a wake-up call a lot of times in the ways in which we regard our own selves and our own time and our own boundaries that we have to unlearn as well. And we need safe spaces to do that in. It's not just the cop, though, killing us, it's deeper than that. And it goes into what Nazinga was talking about the fear and the ways in a lot of times we've been conditioned to fear. So rest is a great way to interrupt that. Rest is a great way to really tap into what ancestral wisdom is happening. Rest is a great way to get well in your body. We have a sleep gap in this country. Typically Black Americans get about 50% less rest than the average white American. So we're talking about a real essential thing here, a real essential human function of sleep and rest that we're not getting. And so we have to reclaim it. We need spaces to reclaim rest. So it's really my biggest activism right now at the moment.
And I just want to hop in and say something in that regard as well, that the acts of violence are not just, being afraid. It's not just about being afraid of a physical attack, even though that's very real in a lot of people's lives. But it's really also very much about the languaging and the verbal attack, right? And even the subtle ways of these microaggressions that we're constantly facing. And even around these conversations and these anti-racist conversations, it can be very difficult, because really, you know, it's not, racism is nonsensical, right? It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. It's not in our human nature, but yet we're forced, it's necessary to have these conversations. And I think that it's really, really important for us to, in any given moment, really question ourselves and ask, you know, are we actually behaving in allied or anti-racist ways? Because it's not a fixed status, you know, for people of color and especially non, you know, people, white people, and really finding the ways that we can have these conversations and also not feeling the need to always have to explain. Because I know in my personal experience, I have a lot of white friends that are awesome and amazing people, and that no discredit to them in any way. But oftentimes when we have these conversations, if they're willing to, which now a lot of people are more likely to have these conversations, it's about wanting to be informed. And we like, it's understandable, you know, a lot of people feel helpless right now. It's like, what can I really do? And I think that it's really important not to ask people of color to explain it to you, you know, to ask to be informed. I think it's really important to educate yourself regarding the matter. And we have so many more resources now, more than ever, in that regard. So to do that work and then join forces with other white people in white spaces to ask those questions, you know, like, do white people have the capacity to stop just the declarations of this independence, right? The declarations of I'm not racist. Like, it needs to go so much further than that. And, you know, I'm a biracial woman. I'm half white, right? So there are so many sides to the story, but it's so important to recognize also, I guess, just to the main point, that the violence is not just, it's not just the fear of the attack or what's actually behind us, but it's, you know, this oppression that is all around us and within us.
Yeah, myself, I try and read as much as I can about being anti-racist and many of these books, but you know, what are some ways you think we can teach children to question beyond what they're taught in the media and general cultural conversation about racism? I think that's for all of, you know, all three of you work with kids. Two of you have kids.
Nazinga, you want to share?
So can you hear me now? I didn't realize I was on mute. That's a hard question to answer, only because at this point, to date I've worked with over 100,000 children. And so, and a lot of my work is about this. So this isn't something novel. And so a few years ago, I created a program for us to have these hard, uncomfortable conversations. And it was a 3-month program where we unpacked the stereotypes, the bias, where I said, this is a free space for everyone to say what they think, right? And right now with social media, we can't even do that, right? Because if someone says what they've been raised to believe, then we are canceling them. And you know, we didn't get here overnight. And it's the time that it took us to get here is usually about the time, they say sometimes in healing, the time that it took you to be where you are, to get where you are, is the time you're gonna have to take to unpack what you have to do. So those conversations with children need to first start at home, because a lot of things that I've had to address with the children I've worked with definitely didn't come from school or media. It came from the things that they were hearing at home. So I like to give this example. I had this student, I'm gonna change his name. His name was Patrick. Patrick was from Russia, but I was always, so this is my stereotype. I have this perception of what a Russian child should look like. But Patrick looked like a child that could have been from Southern India, like one of the children that would be considered untouchable. And so here I am in the class one day and doing work. There was teachers there and I was doing my work. And Patrick was about to get attacked by a group of Black girls because he said to them, In my country, you would be my slave. You wouldn't even be able to talk to me. You're nobody, blah, 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 blah. Where did Patrick get that from? He didn't get that from school. He didn't get that from media, because that wasn't, this happened literally 15 years ago, And so the confusion when they were trying to address it for Patrick was, but Patrick, don't you like Miss Nzinga? He's like, I love Miss Nzinga, but Miss Nzinga's Black. And you just said all of these things. And you could see the cognitive dissonance happening for him in that moment, because there was his lived experiences with someone like myself and his peers who were Black. And then there was what he was being told and hearing, because sometimes it's not even told. We always think children don't hear, but they're constantly hearing the things that you assume that they're not hearing, that he then was trying to merge, right? Like, I have my lived experience at school, and this is what my parents are saying, and it was an explosion. And that's just one story of thousands. And so I think that a lot of the work we have to do happens at home with the parents, and them unpacking their bias, unpacking the things that they don't think exist, and having conversations with their children, or finding people who can help them have better conversations with their children as they unpack these things for themselves. Because a lot of times, I always say, because I do a lot of work with children, parents might not be able to get there, but if we are intentional with our children, they can create the world that we want to see, right? Because we've already been conditioned, and some of those things are just really hard to unpack in this lifetime unless we do some deep spiritual work, and there still might be some residue. So I feel like the work that we need to do with children has to be very intentional, and it might not be where we can be, but we might want to see that with our children. And so finding the right resources, being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and knowing that social media and the WWW, the World Wide Web, isn't necessarily a place for this kind of healing. And we're doing some hardcore healing in a space that's not equipped for it. The work that I was doing in classrooms, we were having the hard conversations, we were having activities to unpack it, and those 3 months didn't even feel enough. And we were doing deep dives there. So just know that this is a work that you might have to continue for a lifetime, not just for yourself, but for your children and your grandchildren, or your nieces and nephews, or whatever children that you're involved with. But we also have to change some of what we're doing, because they're basically mimicking what we're doing as adults, and they're hearing and seeing from us as adults, whether we know it or not.
What are some resources that are more accessible to everyone and to kids that you like, that can be helpful in this way?
Was that question for me?
Yes.
Oh gosh, that's such a hard question. So I am a one size does not fit all healer. So it depends on who we're looking at. If you are a person of color, I would tell you to look at the work of Amos Wilson, which is a Black psychologist that did a lot of work on rearing children of color here in America. I would say that you might want to pick up some history books. There's a lot of amazing history books that you can start to show Black people in a more positive light, because the reality is media and even our history books they talk about our narrative always from a negative experience, especially like when you think about when we talk about history. We don't say people of African descent that were kidnapped. We say slaves. They weren't slaves. They were people who experienced something, but we don't identify them as African descendants. We call them slaves. So we usually start historically there. Yeah, people in America were slaves, or Black people in America were slaves. And that's not our historical timeline. So if you want to find more books, especially if you're specifically working with children, I would suggest a good mentor and colleague of mine called Aubrey Watson has a bookstore called Pyramid Books. You can go to pyramidbooks.net. He has one of the biggest collections of children's books around race that I've seen. I'm a big book person. And a lot of books that I've pulled for the work that I've been doing has come from pyramidbooks.net. But I mean, other resources, I mean, like there's so much in my head, and maybe I can send you a resource list that you can send later. But again, I remember that this is not a one size fits all. Everyone's coming from a different perspective. I'm coming from a perspective as a Haitian American. So I sit in a very hyphen place, because the reality is, because I was an immigrant, I wasn't always accepted within the context of Black people. Because my parents weren't from this country and they spoke a different language. Whereas Aubrey had a different experience because she's biracial. Heather's had a different experience because of this. And so a lot of times we're having this conversation about race, and Black people, we talk about Black people like we're a monolith, and we're not, you know? And so I think that's where we need to start to unpack that. Black comes in different shapes, sizes, tastes, flavors, and colors. And until we start to talk about that, we're always going to get stuck. And so that's all I have to say for now.
I keep feeling like I need to clap after every time you speak. Thank you so much. So we're seeing a lot of younger generations standing up against older generations in regards to racism. What are your, you know, any three of you, your thoughts on this and how things are shifting?
I would say that we're coming into a new era, a new age. You know, what was working before is just, it just can't stand anymore. And so it's makes me feel really hopeful to see youth taking charge and saying, actually, I'm going to take up space right now. I'm not waiting anymore. And so I think it's what we need. And I'm really trying to sit back and learn, because and seeing what I can do to support the youth of this generation, because they are building the world. And I want to do what I can to build, you know, to do my part to pass it on. And that was one thing that we were talking about before the panel, was just like, how do we really make space for youth just so they can say their truth? Because they know a lot of times more than we do. They haven't been as conditioned as much as we have. So they know right and wrong a lot of times sooner than an adult will. So I'm super happy, and I'm just really trying to figure out how I can hold space for youth to step into their power and create those spaces for them to really activate their voices.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I guess we're speaking about the youth and really young people and children specifically. And I actually took that question in a slightly different way, and thinking about, you know, people in their 20s, 30s now speaking up to this older generation of people who either have endured segregation or, you know, things of that nature, and really, really difficult times in regards to oppression. And having these conversations with people, you know, as we age and we mature, our bodies, our mind, what we believe really becomes so hardened. And it can be very difficult to break through those layers. And that's why children, as what, you know, everybody is speaking to, they're so ripe, and they're so able to absorb, which is good and bad, right? So we want to do our part to fill them with things that they can absorb, that will be nurturing and supportive of their growth and their development, and not only their own, but societies, and like this global shift that we really need to see happen on many levels, especially environmentally too. But in regards to, you know, like speaking to the older generation, I'm myself finding difficulty here, so I don't necessarily have an answer for it. I know, like, you know, I'm dealing with my like white grandparents and like my mother's friends and things of that nature, and it's hard not to get angry. Like, it is hard to have these conversations from a calm place. But I think that the really the way to go about it is to educate ourselves first and foremost, because people, just as Nazinga said, right, there are so many different ethnicities and cultures within this like black within the Black experience. And it's really necessary to recognize that first and foremost. But also when we are, learning and educating, re-educating ourselves and unlearning the things that we have learned. Because if we grew up, especially in this country, then we have, subconsciously, been fed with so many of these same racist ideas and experiencing these racist policies that are all around us that a lot of people don't even know about, that are still the thread of our, the foundation of our government. Watch the 13th. Whoever has not, please watch it on Netflix. It's amazing. So for me, that's a big help in speaking to the older generation. I a lot of times refer them to like a really great documentary or a really great book that can, so I don't have to do all of the explaining as I'm learning myself, and unlearning myself. And so that specifically, the 13th, is an awesome documentary on Netflix that has won so many awards and really speaks to racism currently and the way that our structures are set up still to oppress people of color. And, we need to at least know about it so that we can change it.
Wow, unlearning and relearning. Relearning, unlearning, yes. So just want to be conscious of the time. We only have like 10 minutes left or something. I guess one last question for the three of you is, we recognize racism can't be solved in a day, a week, or a month. What's one practice that you believe all of us, every person, can implement to begin the ripple effect of lasting change, true systemic change? Some hope.
I can go. I'd say mirror work. So looking in the mirror, right? There's a lot that I can only speak for myself. There's a lot that I see that's wrong in the world. And then also, if I just go and look on the outside, oh, this is so bad in the media, there's this happening, then it can stifle me sometimes from really doing the work in myself. What can I change? How can I be different with my family? How can I have more courageous conversations, even when they're really difficult? And that's hard. So I would say, like, being able to have some really hard conversations with ourselves is really important. If we're going to shift some of the behaviors that we've adopted in our country for just, centuries.
And to speak to that practice, the mirror work is incredible, and I would like to incorporate more of that into my work in ceremony with my clients. Sometimes we do mirror work, and how powerful, like Heather, in the beginning you spoke to just how important it is to have that reflection, right? And that starts within our families and the smaller communities, the microcosm, and then it can expand outward. So as we know, it does start with ourselves. So for me, an incredible practice is breath work, and it is what I do, and I got into it. I told you guys a little bit about my story, but at a time when I was going through the worst moments of my life, but very much with intention. And so, regarding race and healing systemic racism throughout our country, healing the trauma within our own bodies and the people that we love or people that we know around us, I think the practice of gratitude is actually really, really powerful. Excuse me. Because if you're sitting there, let's say you do some breath work, you do 5 minutes in the morning, breathing into your belly, really softening your body, allowing spirit to, fill you with life. Oh, look at that baby. That's your baby. So cute. I little guy. So practicing gratitude, and all I want to say in that regard is that when we can truly be grateful for what we have, typically we're thinking about all the things that we have to do instead of actually just being grateful or like, oh, I get to do this. If we could just change our vocabulary. But in that practice, I believe, and in my life, it's brought me so much compassion. And compassion, I think, is really what we need the most. The compassion and the real feeling of love for ourselves. And then we can begin to recognize that there is no difference, that we are really all united deep in our core. But we have to also recognize and appreciate the differences as well. So.
a lot of what was just said echoes where I'm at in regards to healing. There's this, I was trying to find the quote because I can't, or proverb, but it says the healer must first heal themselves. And so we've been talking about this globally, about healing, but we're trying to attack it from the outside instead of attacking it from the inside, right? And so one, I don't believe in trying to make people who want to be where they're at come to my side, you know, which is why I always focus on children. If that person wants to be a racist, go ahead, do you. You know, as long as you're not impinging upon my rights, because the reality is I'm very unlikely going to be able to change that person. So if you're here, I assume that you want to do some work for yourself. And so do your work for yourself. And the other quote I like is, when you do your inner work, your vibe attracts your tribe. Then you'll meet other people, and then you can build projects and groups and communities that can do some deeper work. And, you know, maybe you'll have some youth around you that will become adults that can build more work. You know, we have to really think about having like a 500-year plan, because kind of sort of we got here around, it took about 500 years for us to get here. And so, you know, we can't think about like changing the government in from the outside. I think we just need to start with self, neighborhoods, cities, and then it builds out. And so I think just be compassionate with yourself. Don't try to conquer Mount Kilimanjaro when you barely can walk in your neighborhood, you know. Just start with taking a walk every 10 minutes. That might be reading something for 10 minutes every day, but take it easy. Don't try to do all of this unpacking in one day, because it will drive you crazy. It will make you feel not so good and send you into a space that does no one good in the long run.
So self-care is key, and slow. Be gentle with yourself. That's incredibly helpful, even for me to hear. So thank you very much. If we have any questions for the panelists, you can feel free to unmute yourself or type it in the chat box. I don't know, maybe Aubrey, Nazinga, Heather, you guys want to talk some more about certain things that came up? Any questions for one another?
Yeah, I just want to, go off of Heather and Nazinga's point just now that, what I really believe is that we are really just reflections of each other. And if we can see, the universe in this process of creation is really just splitting from the central piece, or the central part of unity, right, into polarity, into negative and positive. And we've kind of changed this story so much where we see negative as this bad thing, right? But we actually need that for there to be creation and there to be energy that creates matter. And so in regard to this conversation, that, we are just that reflection of each other, and walking around to see another perspective of the universe, trying to see itself from another perspective. And to me, that's really, really powerful, because then it allows us to have much more compassion for other people and realize that's just another part of your journey, right? Like, you are me. We are completely one another. And so if you're not doing well, I'm not doing well energetically, even though I may pretend or feel like I am, we're really not, because we are connected on this deep soul level of the same being. And so when we see each other, we see somebody suffering, just recognize, just show that compassion and do whatever we can to help and support in a way that is really nourishing for ourselves and for the other person and the world around us. So.
Yeah, beautiful. And Carol just shared a poem, which is all about, looking at yourself, not trying to find the answers outside. And then we have a question from Jessica. Are there examples where the panelists see this healing work having impact on communities? That's a great question. Geographically and some of the activities happening.
Do you mean in current times or even prior to 2020, you know, the book that will go down in history books. This is a whole different year. I can speak personally, school, I created a program for Broward County schools, and it was a deep dive for 6 months. And at the top of it, certain children didn't have conversations with each other. They definitely had bias against each other. And at the end, the children were friends with people that they probably would have never been friends with before. They reported having a better, they saw each other in each other instead of looking at each other for their differences. And then they co-created other programs that existed beyond my project. And it led to us getting more funding and doing more of it in different schools. So the work is there, but again, like, this work is uncomfortable work, you know? And so I always like to use the analogy of, think of a seed, what it takes for it to become a plant, to go from seed to a sprout, to like break that shell and come through the soil and towards the sun. And I think that's the place where we're at right now. 2020 vision is real. Everyone was like, oh yeah, we want to see 2020 vision. And, you know, like, 2020 vision doesn't only mean you see the good things, you also see the bad things. And I think that's where we're at right now. And so it's like, how do we clean up house? It's an opportunity for us to pivot if we choose, or stay in the same place that we've always been.
I'd also say for like healing work, just to veggie back on what Nazinga was saying, outside of 2020, some things to look at would be included, would be restorative justice. You look up restorative justice circles. So that's like that's a healing practice that's been utilized particularly with youth. That's had some really good results depending upon the way it's used, but it comes from indigenous practices of really restoring harm in communities and seeing our humanity first before we judge the action on its own. So that's one thing that you might, if you're looking into like, well, what are the implications of healing work in larger communities? I'd start, you know, restorative justice is a good place to start. They've also done a lot of research on transcendent, like meditation, and how that can impact just the overall well-being and academics of youth and children. So those would be two things I would, if you're interested, those would be two things I would look up.
Fantastic. I think unless Aubrey has something to add, and unless there's other questions.
I'd like to also say that we should look at Rwanda as a great example in terms of like where they are now and what they came from. They've done a lot of healing work to get to the place that they're at now. And a lot of times we only talk about the genocide and we don't talk about the work that they did, the healing modalities that they used, the traditional systems of dance and song and crying to move through that trauma that they experienced so that they could be almost like they're thriving in a different kind of way right now than they were a few decades ago.
Wow, I had no idea. So we can really learn from them and apply that here because they've been through it, and how do they, I mean, I know the conversation's run over, but how can we see that they've shifted and it's a much different society? What does that look like?
They're actually, when you do a 54 count, you know, there's 54 countries on the continent. They're actually up there in terms of like GDP, violence not being a high thing. And there's even some conversations online or research as well as articles on how they were able to shift from the genocide till now. And so I think that's a great model because they use non-traditional modalities. I mean, when I say non-traditional, meaning Western perspective of healing, but what's traditional to the continent. And I think that it's important as we have these conversations about healing from racism, that some of the things that people of color need to do need to look like things that are indigenous to like more traditional systems for healing as well. And I think sometimes that gets left out in the conversation when we talk about healing. We're dismissive of other practices unless they've gotten a certain stamp on them. And I know you know that kind of stuff, Talia.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been incredibly illuminating, and just to be a listener and have a beginner's mind and take it in, and really grateful for all of your, your vulnerability and each one of your, unique experiences and wisdom. And thank you for showing up, and thank you to the audience for being willing to show up as well. It's not an easy topic to discuss. So with that, thank you. I hope everyone has a great evening.
You guys want to take one breath together? Just one?
One breath.
Literal breath? Okay.
Yeah.
Bring your hands to your heart. Just to close this beautiful circle, I've learned so much, in the process of having this conversation. So thank you guys, and thank you for Talia, Healers Collective, and EO for putting this together for us and giving us the space. So hands to the heart, and just for a second, notice the heartbeat, what it feels like to be in your body in this moment. And let's take one deep breath in together. Exhale through the mouth, letting it go. It is safe to surrender. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Bye.